All right, we have hit the button and we are live. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to episode 43 of the TechForge podcast.
That was too fast, Ned. The live button went on too fast.
Well, just deal with it.
Bam. That's
Well,
fine,
I am your host, Ned. I want to welcome you all once again. And I am joined by my ever faithful co-host, Jason. Unfortunately, Hunter is unable to be with us because, once again, the local internet service provider has decided that he doesn't get to have internet tonight because reasons that have not been made clear to anyone.
Could just say because reasons, Ned. It's TMI, Ned.
Well,
TMI.
now you know regardless. So,
Bam.
we are going to give everyone the tech news that they actually came here for.
Really?
Well, we're going to give them tech news.
Oh.
So, we have a few bits of tech news from some miscellaneous tech news to get us started today. This is
from all the corners of the internets.
Indeed. This is from Tom's Guide. Now you can buy the first ever 1 terabyte micro SD card. So this is something that's kind of been known for a while that it was going to be a thing. This was announced way back in February when SanDisk announced they were going to have a 1 terabyte micro SD card available in Q2 of this year. And now it is available. The SanDisk Extreme 1 terabyte micro SD V30 is about the size of your thumbnail and currently lists on the SanDisk online direct store for $450.
Oh, is that it?
And so, just remember that it wasn't that long ago that a 200 gigabyte micro SD card was the biggest micro SD card you could get, and it was going for almost that same price. So, obviously, we're going to see storage density improve. And the fact that we can now see micro SD cards the size of your thumbnail with 1 terabyte of storage is just absolutely mind-blowing to me.
Really?
Well, I mean, just think about it from a data density perspective. You're fitting 1 billion bytes of information in an area roughly the size of your thumbnail.
There's no data densities on my thumbnail, Ned.
Maybe not on yours.
No.
Definitely on SanDisk micro SD card. So, if you absolutely need 1 terabyte of storage for your camera or for your smartphone or what have you, well, now you can get it. It's just going to cost you almost as much as your smartphone.
I don't know if I like that, Ned.
Give it a couple of years. It'll get down to cheap prices.
I like that, Ned.
Reminds me way back when I remember it was a Black Friday sale. I got up with my parents, and this was back in a time period where USB thumb drives were the in thing. And I picked up a 4 gigabyte USB thumb drive because that was one of the biggest capacities you could get at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And I was shocked that it was on sale for $45. Now, the idea of paying $45 for a 4 gigabyte USB thumb drive today to us would be absolutely ludicrous. But remember, this was about 10 years ago.
Yeah, you see, it's hard for me to remember yesterday. And I remember being excited about that kind of stuff maybe 10 years ago. But I don't remember that far back. So, yeah.
Well, I just remember this particular event because it was a Black Friday sale, and it was one of the last times I went to a Radio Shack before Radio Shack ceased to exist.
Oh, so that's how you remember it.
Mm-hmm.
Because of the demise of one of my favorite stores of all time. That's how you remember it.
Sad but true.
Mm-hmm. You're
Rest
being
in
mean
peace,
to me,
Radio
Ned.
Shack.
Being mean again. Hi, Ned.
Let's see. So this story is an interesting follow-up to what we talked about last week. So we talked about the new Frontier supercomputer that's going to be built at Oak Ridge National Laboratory.
Yes,
And that it was
we
supposed
talked
to be built by Cray Supercomputer.
and that it was going to become Skynet. Yes, we talked about this.
Well, turns out Hewlett-Packard Enterprise is actually buying Cray Supercomputer for $1.3 billion.
1,300 pieces. So, why are they buying it, Ned?
Well, most likely it's because Cray is a long-standing name in high-end supercomputing. I mean,
They're buying the company. Oh,
yeah,
crap.
they're buying Cray Supercomputer.
Okay.
They're buying the Cray company.
Wow. Okay. For some reason, I was thinking they're buying a supercomputer, and I'm thinking, big whoop. HP,
No,
big
they're
company.
buying HP Enterprise is buying the entirety of supercomputer maker Cray. They're buying the Cray company.
Okay.
I was going to say, Cray is one of the oldest supercomputing companies in the United States.
Yeah.
So if the acquisition goes through, it'll be worth $1.3 billion. And HP Enterprise will be paying roughly $35 per share for Cray, which is roughly $5 premium over their closing stock price of $29.81 on Thursday.
Ooh.
So we know that HP has been trying to move more into the data center space. You know, they spun off their enterprise division so that their consumer division wouldn't continue to drag it down. But this article here from TechSpot mentions that Cray got its start in 1972 when Seymour Cray left the Control Data Corporation to start his own company, and that their first product, the Cray 1 supercomputer, paved the way for Cray to become a major player in the supercomputer industry over the next several decades, and that HP expects the transaction to close in the first quarter of 2020.
Good.
So that is it's entirely possible that the Cray name will be kind of subsumed into HP Enterprise. I kind of doubt it, though, because when you have a name that's that recognizable in the field, that's a brand you want to bank on.
So it's kind of funny that last week we talked about AMD and Cray and the Oak Ridge boys building Skynet, but now it's going to be AMD, Cray, Oak Ridge boys, and HP building Skynet. 4.
Well,
4, Ned.
May Frontier be merciful to us and let us all, I for one, welcome our upcoming supercomputing overlords.
Well, just start working on your nuclear tans. That's all I got to say.
In the meantime, looks like Micron, through their house brand Crucial, has released new Ballistex Elite DRAM at that has a rated speed of 3600 megahertz, but apparently features Micron's new E-die memory and broke the world record for DRAM speed, which had just been broken this week previously by AData. So AData broke the world record for DRAM speed when they hit 5,634 megahertz.
They did it. They did it with an i7 8086K on an ROG Maximus Apex. Nice. Micron E-die.
Yes. So Micron E-die is apparently part of their latest process. And with this new E-die memory from Micron, they hit 5,726 megahertz for DDR4, which is 92 megahertz faster than the AData record earlier this week, and is 79% faster than its rated speed of 3,200 megahertz.
So that 5,700 megahertz speed is kind of setting with me, mainly because I saw a leak earlier this week stating that Ryzen 3000 will be compatible with 5,000 megahertz RAM.
I mean, I doubt we'll see 5,000 megahertz RAM in the mainstream space for a while yet, but it's good to know that, yes, it will support 5,000 megahertz RAM, and RAM already exists that's capable of that speed.
Yep. Interesting.
And to be honest, I'm just happy when my motherboard will hit 3,200.
Yeah. Don't make me laugh, Ned. Make me cough. Ah.
So, as you mentioned, this was made with an i7 8086K on an Asus Maximus 7, or excuse me, Maximus 11 Apex board.
Which that board's known for pretty solid RAM overclocking anyway.
Pretty much. And if you want some of this RAM for yourself, according to Crucial, you can purchase the Ballistix Elite 3600 for $96.99 on Amazon in an 8 gig configuration. So, yeah, if you're going to get this RAM, you're going to pay a lot for it.
Yeah, that's kind of pricey considering you can get, DDR 3200 16 gig kits for about that price. So,
Indeed.
Actually, less than that. So, wow. Well, it's good RAM. I don't know.
Okay. This next one, I don't know whether to be excited or just to hang my head in shame, because apparently the RGB menace continues to subsume every possible part of the PC, and Clev has even brought that to your M.2 SSD, as they have finally released and listed their RGB-coded M.2 SSD, the CRAS C700 RGB SSD. And for those of you who may not have seen this monstrosity, let me go ahead and share that with you now. So, this is the monstrosity in question.
You can use the manufacturer's name as a verb. Clev?
Yep.
Like, I got a blood test, and I figured out that I got the Clev.
Technically, that's using it as a noun.
Oh. Well, I thought it was a verb. Oh, yeah, you're right. That is a noun.
Or you could use it as a verb, as in, I saw all the blingy lights in his case, and it made me want to clev my own eyes out.
Or Ned cleved me on the head.
I suppose that too.
Hmm.
So, the Clev CRAS, all joking aside, the Clev CRAS C700, yes, it's all blinged out with all the RGB, and whether you like that or not, it's up to you. At the very least, the heatsink does help with thermal dissipation, and it does have controllable RGB lighting if that's your thing. And it comes in 3 different capacities: 120 gigabytes, 240 gigabytes, and 480 gigabytes, featuring sequential read speeds of around 1500 megabytes per second and sequential writes based on capacity. You can see here in the chart, the 120 gig is around 550 megabytes per second, 240 gig is around 1000 megabytes per second, and the 480 gig is around 1300 megabytes per second. So these aren't going to be the fastest in the world, but that's not surprising. It's built on Silicon Motion's SM2263EN controller, which is a budget controller, and it's using SK Hynix 72-layer NAND flash, which is TLC memory. So that kind of super speed we wouldn't be expecting. But it's a solid entry-level drive. And let's see, I don't think they have prices posted yet.
No, they don't. I was going to say the only way this works is if it's at budget pricing. Yeah, the RGB's nice, but...
And yeah, they can charge a small premium for the RGB, but...
not much. I mean, don't be charging more than $70 for a 480.
In the budget price range, no.
Not with these performance levels here.
No. Especially as a particular device that we're going to look at in the hardware section is currently retailing for about $110 and has double the capacity of the highest end one of these and has similar performance numbers.
Yeah. Are you talking about the Intel 660p?
Indeed, the Intel 660p.
Yeah, that's kind of like the budget go-to SSD king right now.
Well, mostly because QLC NAND flash is dirt cheap, and while it isn't the fastest NVMe SSD drive in the world, it's one of the fastest you can get at its price point.
Yeah. Yep.
Alrighty. But we still have some other things we need to talk about first before we get to the hardware deals. And it's been announced for some time now that AMD is planning to have an announcement of some of their upcoming technologies at Computex, which, when we record this, is literally next week. And so, with Computex right around the corner, of course, there's going to be a lot of leaks about upcoming products from AMD, from their motherboard partners, from their GPU partners, and all their add-in board partners. So, naturally, we have yet more AMD leaks this week. And this first one, I don't even know if you'd necessarily call it a leak, because BioStar just straight up listed their AMD X570 Racing GT8 motherboard on their website, which basically gave away all the specs of the X570 chipset. And so
it's a 12-phase VRM.
I was going to say, let me share the list with our lovely viewers. So here we go. Okay, so notice they put side by side each of their current high-end boards along with their budget B450M board. So you've got the Racing X570 GT8 alongside the Racing X470 GT8, which is its comparable equivalent from the 400 series, along with the Micro ATX variant and the B450M variant.
So the DD4000 OC is interesting.
Indeed.
I bet it's the same board. They just put a different chipset in it.
A lot of the things appear to be the same.
Or the same PCB, at least.
Yeah, the PCB does look remarkably similar. However, one thing that they note, and that I've seen on several other of the X570 boards, is that when they're pictured like they are here, if you look at the chipset itself, let's zoom in here.
It's really hard to notice from this picture.
Notice there is a chipset fan there.
Oh, that's interesting.
So is the X570 chipset, does it run hot? We don't know.
Oh, come on. I highly doubt it. These North bridges aren't really responsible for much anymore.
Well, the reason I bring it up, I didn't include this as a link originally, but I wanted to point it out because that's not the only one that has had pictures leak out of X570 boards. For example, notice this MSI board with a chipset fan. Another MSI board with a chipset fan.
Is that an X570?
Yes. The MPG and Pro Carbon. This is the MTG X570, and this is the X570 Pro Carbon.
Interesting.
Let's see. There's a couple others that have released photos. This was also MSI. It was the MSI X570 Ace. These were some teaser images. Biostar and ASRock also did. Let's see. I wanted to say there was at least one other one, but but there have been multiple pictures and multiple teased images of X570 motherboards with chipset fans, which is why I ask, is this an aesthetic choice? Is this something that's proving necessary for this particular chipset?
I bet you it's aesthetic. Because the PCIe spec will come within the processor. So, as will the onboard memory controller, and most of the Northbridge specific circuitry will be integrated into the processor. So, what's interesting though is that this is definitely confirming PCIe 4.
Correct.
Which was leaked. So, and I don't know if it's me, but it looks like we're seeing maybe another tier higher this time around.
Possibly.
We're starting to see some of the 390-esque type features, or at least looks on some of these, like the what was it, the MSI 390 Meg, which was their big dollar motherboard. I think they've got an X570 variant now.
Right.
I think with all of the volume sales that AMD's had with first and second gen Ryzen, they're really starting to invest more in the platform.
Kind of seems like it.
Well, they've got all the momentum on the CPU side, so pretty interesting, Ned.
That it is. That it is. Okay. So some additional leaks. This next one, the original leak comes from Tomb Apasak's Twitter, where we have seen a number of reliable leaks in the past. This for the Ryzen 5 3400G and Ryzen 3 3200G. And the B550 chipset.
So the B550, I don't think is going to be too interesting. The interesting thing about these two chips, though, is going to be the fact that they're going to be soldered and their clock speed ranges.
Yeah, let me go ahead and show off that particular table. Here we are. So this is from Tom's Hardware, but they compare the information from the Tomb Apasak leak to the current Ryzen 3 2200G and Ryzen 5 2400G. Now, to be honest, these particular stats for these parts don't surprise me a whole lot. Because the thing we had to remember about the APUs is they're always based one generation behind, architecture-wise, the mainstream desktop CPUs.
Mm-hmm.
So these are Zen Plus, which means these are using basically the same architecture design as the Ryzen 2000 parts.
Right.
They're using Zen Plus, not Zen 2.
So they'll be 12 nanometer instead of 7.
Correct.
They most likely won't have the chiplet design either. They'll be monolithic. But they're going to have, so they're not going to be, what's the word? They're not going to be a huge upgrade, but there are going to be some innovations here.
They're going to be more evolutionary than revolutionary.
That's what I was looking for. Because the current Ryzen APUs, they don't have solder between the CPU die and the IHS. They use a heat paste or a thermal paste. So that's one. Two is they will be on a slightly smaller node. So with being on a slightly smaller node and with the solder interface material, they're going to potentially deliver better thermals.
And we see that in the fact that we have the higher base and boost clocks.
Mm-hmm.
With the 2400G, you had 3.6 base with 3.9 boost. According to the leak, we're going to have 3.7 base with a 4.2 gigahertz boost on the 3400G. And likewise, on the 3200, we're going to see 3.6 base and 4.0 boost.
Well, and I don't know if you're going to be able to get much higher than 4.2 all core as an overclock. Maybe 4.3. I don't know.
To be honest, though, yeah, with the 2400G, you basically hit a wall right around 3.9 gigahertz. Some of the better silicon ones did hit 4 gigahertz. So we're basically seeing the same kind of uplift we saw from first gen Ryzen to Ryzen 2000 on Zen Plus. So these are not terribly surprising for the first iteration of the Ryzen 3000 APUs. The Matisse-based APUs, the ones that we can expect based on Zen 2, likely aren't going to be out till next year.
Right.
So just keep that in mind with these. These are technically, even though they're numbered as 3000 series parts, they're still technically Zen Plus, just like the Ryzen 2000 series.
And they'll still likely be based on Vega 8 for the Ryzen 3 part, and then Vega 11 for the Ryzen 5 part, which honestly they're pretty good. I mean, you're going to be bandwidth limited by the RAM, so you're going to be, if you have 3200 megahertz RAM in a dual channel config, you're going to have 50 to 54, I forget exactly, 50 to 54 gigabits or gigabytes per second transfer, and that's going to be your biggest bottleneck. But in my own testing of the 2400G, having an all-core overclock at 4 gigahertz is not out of the realm of possibilities. And then upping the 1250 base clock of the GPU to like 15 or 1600 megahertz is also very possible. But you have to have a fairly decent VRM on your motherboard for that, and good cooling. Because if you're not careful, that 65 watt TDP turns into 130 watts.
Yep.
You're combining both the APU and the CPU in an overclock. So,
indeed. Well, that's not the only Ryzen CPU APU leak we had this week, though. There was another leak, this one covered by WCCF Tech, of a AMD 12-core Zen 2 engineering sample benchmark being leaked, which, according to them, featured higher IPC than a Threadripper 1920X.
which is very interesting, but I'm not surprising. Not surprising. Because this is a redesign of Ryzen.
Pretty much. So, of course, this particular leak appears to be older. It's an engineering sample from a couple of months back, but the reason we know is because it's codenamed as AMD Cogear MTS, which is a code name for some of the X570 chipset motherboards. And here, this particular engineering sample was running at a 3.4 gigahertz base clock, a 3.7 gigahertz turbo. Now, that's not unusual for an engineering sample, which typically run at lower clock rates than the end product, because they're wanting to make sure that everything is stable before they really start cranking the clocks. Still, 3.4 gigahertz base and a 3.7 gigahertz turbo is still fairly competitive with mid-range Ryzen clocks from even the Ryzen 1000 generation.
Well, that's today's ecosystem. Tomorrow's is going to be Ryzen 3000. So,
right, and that's my point. If the engineering sample that is intentionally run at lower clocks than it's capable of is already showing clock speeds competitive with the current ecosystem, then we can be fairly confident that the upcoming one will be significantly better.
I think the realistic expectation is that there's going to be some sort of a Ryzen 9 with 16 cores, and current Ryzen 7 will be 12-core variants. Of course, we'll have to wait a few weeks, but to see what what they'll say, but that's what I'm expecting, at least.
So basically, what they were able to tell from this particular leak, which, if I'm reading this correctly, this particular leak looks like it came from Sysaw Sandra. And in the floating point operations tests, it came out faster than the 1920X, even though it has a lower clock speed and significantly lower memory bandwidth, which indicates that Zen 2, of course, is bringing significant IPC gains to the desktop, which, again, not surprising, it's 7 nanometer versus the 14 nanometer of the original Threadripper, and it's also coming in on the Zen 2 die, whereas original Threadripper is still using Zen dies.
Right, and I mean with the memory bandwidth stuff, I mean the Threadripper is using quad channel RAM, so
Right. That's the advantage that it has.
right.
So, oh, I just realized I never actually showed the benchmark, so let me do that.
Ever?
So, this is the actual benchmark that they're referring to. Notice it is engineering sample 2D3212 BGMCWH2_37/34_N. If we use the decipher, the code reader that we've used in the past, that's how we're able to tell it's a 3.4 gigahertz base with a 3.7 gigahertz turbo, even though you'll notice here it reads differently, but it's one CPU, 12 cores, 24 threads. And notice it is not socket TR. It's not socket TR, which is the one that's used for Threadripper. It's socket AM4. So this is not a new Threadripper. This is something on the AM4 socket.
Is it?
So they show single core, quad core, and multi-core. Of course, single core is what you'd expect. Quad core is 4 cores. Multi-core is all the cores. And notice how it scales.
Pretty well.
Apparently, in this particular benchmark, it did better than 99.3% of all other CPUs in its range.
This isn't Sysoft Sandra. This is it's a benchmarking site.
HWBot?
No. Benchmark.com.
Okay. That's my bad. I didn't read that correctly.
Oh, no, wait. What was it? Oh, there's a website you can go to. User benchmark?
Yes, that's it. It's user benchmark.
Yeah.
Yeah, and apparently they tested it with an RX 550, a basic 500 gigabyte hard drive, and 16 gigs of DDR4. They say clocked at 1600 megahertz, but I think you have to remember it is DDR4. So 1600 megahertz means it's 3200 megahertz double data rate. So don't be too weirded out by that 1600 megahertz number.
Yep.
So
Sweet.
I for one am looking forward to 12 core and 16 core Zen 2. I certainly hope that we do get those on the desktop this generation.
Yeah, me too. I mean, if 12 core releases at 5 gigahertz, I'll be very tempted to get that sucker. Very tempted. Not so much 16, although that would be tempting, but a high speed 12 core would be very tempting.
Because, I mean, don't get me wrong, I like my 1800X, and having 8 cores, 16 threads is nothing to sneeze at.
No.
But having 12 cores, 24 threads, well, now.
Well, at upper 4, possibly even 5 gigahertz, man. I mean, that would be very tempting.
All right. And, well, not all the potential releases or leaks can be bombshells. This one is, well, I almost didn't include it because it's something that's kind of meh, but you have to have budget range options as well. And apparently, in the INF file of AMD's Adrenalin 19.4.3 graphics drivers, a member of the Tech PowerUp forum found an entry for a Radeon RX 640 with the same device ID as the Radeon RX 550X from the current generation, which is a little odd given that most of the rumors and most of the speculation that's currently out there are pointing toward a Radeon RX 3000 series nomenclature for the upcoming Radeon RX series.
Well, all that stuff is subject to change anyway.
I mean, that's true. And they do make a point to point out in the Tech PowerUp article that it could be that what AMD is doing is they're reserving RX 600 branding for perhaps Polaris-based Polaris-based chips on the low end, kind of like they did for some of the rebranding of the 7000 series when they called it the Radeon HD 8000 series, but it was only for OEM manufacturers.
Ah. Well, and if they're just looking at putting some mid-level parts out there anyway, which is one of the working theories for Navi, that it's just basically replacing Polaris, even though they'll probably have a 60 level part that's as fast as the current RX 580, and they'll probably top out at around somewhere between RTX 2060 and 2070. Calling them RX 600 series may not be out of the realm of possibilities. So your 60 level part could have RX 580 level performance at 75 watts, and then you could have a 70 level part, which gives you significantly better performance than that, and then, like an 80 level, which is probably going to be somewhere between Vega 56 and 64. So it's possible, right? I mean, current RX is 500 series, so, well, for the Polaris-based stuff.
And Tech PowerUp also makes the point that what AMD could be doing is they're basically keeping their Polaris parts at the low end so that they can rebrand those and save all the Navi GPUs for the mid-range and the higher tiers.
Yeah. And, they did just release Ryzen 7 or Radeon 7. So I don't know if they'll be so quick to replace it just yet.
We'll see. But anyway, the reason the RX 640 is kind of a snooze product for enthusiasts is if it is based on the RX 550X, well, the RX 550X only has 640 stream processors with 32 texture mapping units, 16 ROPS, and 2 gigs of GDDR5 on a 128-bit memory bus. So in other words, it's a very entry-level GPU. Basically designed to give you a display adapter when you wanted something a little bit better than integrated graphics.
I wonder if that's any better than the 2400G's graphics.
You know, that's an interesting comparison.
Hmm. I don't know.
So RX 640, and there was also rumors of an RX 630. It's entirely possible these things could exist, but in the meantime, it's not exactly something that would excite the average enthusiast.
No, you need at least 580 to get any kind of buzz out of it, I would think. It's interesting though. It could be kind of a sign of things to come. Hard to say.
Right. Well, that concludes all the leaks and news we have from AMD. We have a couple of things, and a couple of really important things to talk about from Intel. And of course, the big news this week with Intel has been that, yes, there have been more CPU vulnerabilities based on the same exploits that were originally documented as Spectre and Meltdown in January of last year. And these new attacks have the names RIDL, Fallout, and Zombie Load. These are 3 different security flaws, but they all are categorized as what Intel is now calling microarchitectural data sampling vulnerabilities, or MDS, to sound nice and generic. And so all 3 of these attacks basically utilize the same speculative execution flaws as Spectre and Meltdown last year. Depending on which one you're talking about, it can either cause remote code execution, it could extract sensitive data that would otherwise be protected. Basically, these have been identified as been given these identifiers: microarchitectural store buffer data sampling, microarchitectural load port data sampling, microarchitectural fill buffer data sampling, and microarchitectural data sampling of uncacheable memory.
So from what I've seen of this, Intel says if you have 8th gen or better, you're fine. If you have anything below that, they're suggesting that you disable hyperthreading, because that's
as a temporary solution. Yes.
Yes. And yeah, that's too bad.
So
and they say that I saw some performance benchmarks out there, and they were of benchmarks that don't even utilize hyperthreading, really. I mean, it's basically Intel just trying to downplay it a little bit.
Long enough to hopefully get everyone upgraded to CPUs that have hardware mitigations built in.
Yeah, I mean, they're just doing some damage control, basically.
So basically, if you have a CPU built from 2011 up till the 8th gen released last year, your CPU, your Intel CPU is vulnerable. If you have an AMD CPU, then you are fine, as AMD CPUs nor ARM CPUs are vulnerable to this particular vulnerability because they handle speculative execution differently.
So basically, Sandy Bridge to Cabby Lake.
Yes, Sandy Bridge to Cabby Lake are all vulnerable. Now, Intel has already worked with Windows or Microsoft in Windows, as well as Apple with Mac OS, and with the Linux Foundation to get mitigations added to the various operating systems for all of these. And so if you have your system up to date, you likely have nothing to worry about. On the other hand, if you have an older system that has not been updated in a while, you need to make sure it is updated to the latest version of your operating system to make sure this is mitigated. Now, they have estimated there are some performance drop-offs with this particular vulnerability. Once the patch is in place, well, we'll talk a little bit more about that. Apple posted some very significant performance degradation with these mitigated, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So these three vulnerabilities, Zombie Load, Fallout, and RIDL. Zombie Load takes its moniker from what the researchers have termed as zombie loads, which are data that the processor cannot properly process. Basically, this data load forces the processor to use microcode to prevent it from crashing, and then that allows the application's data to leak from the processor's core to where it can be read by the malicious program. Basically, Zombie Load's most chilling potential behavior is that it can be used to leak data out of virtual machines.
Ned, is a zombie load taking a dump? Is that a zombie taking a dump?
No, in this case, a zombie load is basically a malicious data payload designed to cause a CPU to get pushed almost to the point of crashing, only to give it the chance to recover, dump all of the data that it was working on so that this malicious process can then take that data and leak it out from the processor.
So it's a leaky zombie taking a dump as big as a payload.
I'm just going to say yes so we can continue.
It's Friday night there, Ned.
That's true. Second attack is called Fallout. Now, Fallout leaks data from storage buffers, which are used by the processor's pipeline, a series of instructions from the CPU designed to make the computer run faster, to hold or store data. Basically, what the Fallout attack lets you do is you can bypass the kernel address space, which normally uses what's called a kernel address space layout randomization algorithm, or CASLR, to prevent this kind of issue. The thing is, Fallout can use its malicious payload to bypass CASLR and grab data from any buffer it wants. Basically, this uses the same idea as Meltdown, but Fallout in particular, they note that the measures placed into the latest Core i9 CPUs, the Coffee Lake Refresh CPUs, that were put in place to mitigate Meltdown actually makes them more susceptible to Fallout. So, yeah, the thing they did to fix Meltdown actually makes Fallout easier to do. So, yay. Finally, Riddle, or RIDL, is short for Random or Rogue In-Flight Data Load. So, Riddle can be used to leak data from a vulnerable CPU's internal buffers. They were able to demonstrate this in a Linux environment that allowed them to leak root passwords, kernel data, and even strings of information from other processes. So basically, Riddle can allow you to steal data from other programs running on the same system without the other program ever knowing it, because it bypasses all the normal kernel level protections against that kind of thing.
Cool.
And so basically, Intel CPUs are vulnerable once again, and all of these are things you're going to have to update your system to mitigate in software, because, well, even the latest generation CPUs can't totally mitigate it in hardware. Now, supposedly, like Jason said, your 8th and 9th generation CPUs are mostly protected from these attacks, except for a very small portion of some of the 9th generation CPUs, which may actually be more vulnerable to the attack because of the mitigations they put in place for the earlier Spectre and Meltdown patches. So, yay! Okay. Now, I did mention a little earlier, Apple had posted some of the things they were doing to mitigate these Intel CPU attacks. And so I went to a website that I would almost never normally go to for this show, and that is 9to5Mac, because they had a good detailed summary of what this was. So basically, when these vulnerabilities were discovered, they were brought to Intel's attention. Intel took them to Microsoft and Apple and the Linux Foundation, and they did their own testing. Apple recently posted a document to its website, their support forums, where they talk about how to enable full mitigation for microarchitectural data sampling vulnerabilities in Intel processors. Now, first of all, you have to be on Mac OS Mojave, High Sierra, or Sierra to install the requisite security updates. They recommend, like we said before, that you disable hyperthreading for full mitigation to prevent information leakage across threads. Now, they say that with hyperthreading disabled and with full mitigations installed, you could see up to a 40% reduction in performance in multi-threaded workloads. But I would say most of that drop-off is not due to the actual mitigations themselves, but due to the fact that you're shutting down hyperthreading, which hyperthreading in general gives you a roughly a 50% increase in performance over non-hyperthreaded parts. So to see a 40% drop-off when you disable hyperthreading is not that unusual.
Yeah, I mean, a 40% performance degradation that, I mean, to secure your system, it's nice to secure your system, but at a 40% cost of performance.
Well, in certain heavily multi-threaded workloads.
Yeah.
In most workloads, it's more like 3 to 9%.
But still. Yeah, I don't know.
Yes. Intel, unfortunately, is having to deal with yet another CPU vulnerability, and that means it's going to hurt performance for those of us who install those mitigations if you want to keep your system up to date and to keep it secure. Or you could just go AMD.
That's just asking too much, people, Ned.
I'm sorry. I shouldn't even have brought it up. So let's see. We haven't been talking about NVIDIA a lot lately. NVIDIA they released a number of products over the last several months. We have expressed our displeasure with some of the pricing around these products, in particular the RTX cards, which we feel are extremely overpriced for the performance they offer. But NVIDIA is not resting on its laurels. They know that AMD's Navi is coming, and this article from PC Games In says that they are prepared to counter Navi with a refreshed 16 gigabits per second Turing graphics cards. And I'm assuming the 16 gigabits per second here is referring to a refreshed version of the GDDR6 RAM or memory that is on the Turing GPUs. If I remember correctly, the current GDDR6 is 14 gigabits per second.
Yes, it is 14 gigabits per second.
So to add an additional 2 gigabits per second should allow a significant uptick in bandwidth and clock speed.
Well, there are some games, there are some workloads where even the Turing-based cards could use a little bit more memory bandwidth. Yes, this will help, but it's going to come at a cost, though. I mean, it's going to come. You could see up to $200 extra for a similar part, and I don't know if it's necessarily worth it. Like, okay, a RTX 2060 costs $350, but then you're spending $450 to $550 for one that's got this kind of RAM on it. So, just to put it in perspective.
So yeah, just keep in mind that yes, they likely will counter with these newer 16 gigabits per second variants, but you're going to probably pay more for it, and it's probably not going to be that huge a performance uplift. I mean, we remember with the Pascal cards, the jump from the 9 gigabits per second memory to the 11 gigabits per second memory that basically resulted in single-digit performance gains. Some of which were within the margin of error.
Yeah, I mean, when they did this with Pascal? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They did something similar with some of the Pascal SKUs, and there were some. I mean, it was nice to see from a performance standpoint because it did improve performance a little bit. But you're not talking like 20%. You're talking like maybe 5%, depending on the game. So
right, single-digit gains.
Right. So it'll be interesting to see. It'll be interesting to read reviews or watch YouTube reviews on it. But at the end of the day, if Navi comes out and you're getting, say, RTX 2070 or somewhere between 2060 and 2070 level performance for $300,
yeah, that's going to be hard to argue with.
Yeah. So I don't know, man. I don't know. I've got the feeling like we're at the calm before the storm kind of thing. So
indeed,
it's going to be interesting to see what happens in the next 2 months.
And so, well, some might argue that with all of this stuff on the horizon, now would not be the best time to purchase new computer parts. But, well, I would not necessarily disagree. But sometimes you need to build a system right now. And if you need to build a system right now, we have a few deals this week to help you do that. This first one is a solid combo deal from Newegg that I am going to share here on the screen.
All right.
Whoa. That was not the right screen. There we go. That's the screen. This is a Ryzen 7 2700 CPU paired with an MSI Gaming X470 Plus. a X470 Gaming Plus motherboard. Now, separately, the two of those would come together for $349.98. But in this combo deal, you get $40 off, and you get the pair for $309.98. Now, this is a pretty solid deal. You're getting a roughly $130 motherboard and a $220 processor for right around $310 in total. If you're looking for a solid base for a new streaming PC, or just a solid base for a high-end workstation, or a high-end mainstream workstation, I should say, then this is some solid option.
This is true. I just found an RX 590 for $199, Ned.
It's not a bad price.
No, it's not. It's very intriguing, Ned.
Speaking of a good price, we have its smaller sibling, the RX 580 8 gig. This is the Sapphire Pulse model, RX 580 8 gig. Now, the $209.99 price normally wouldn't be terribly interesting to me. However, it does have this $30 off with promo code offer that is good for the next 4 to 7 days. $30 off brings this down to $179.99.
Really?
And at $179.99 for a brand new RX 588 gig is a pretty good deal. Yes, especially when you consider you get 2 free games in the bargain that are worth $60 a piece. The Division 2 and World War Z. So if you were going to get those games anyway at $120, you're getting those games free. Effectively, you'd be getting the graphics card for $60 after the value of the games.
Hey, Ned, so I was just doing some math in my head. If I took Ned divided by Ned, it equals 1.
Astounding.
Yeah. Well, it's 10:07 on a Friday night, so meh.
That's fair. So our audience is getting a little insight into how we record these things. We're actually recording a night later than normal because, well, we've all been a bit sick this week, and this was the first night we felt well enough to actually get together and record this. So,
yes.
All right, and our final deal, and this is possibly the best deal that we have this week. This is the Fantex Eclipse P300. Now, this particular case has been eclipsed by its successors, the P350 and the P400 and the P450. However, the Eclipse P300 is still a solid budget case. It is currently $49.99 after a $10 mail-in rebate. And for that, you get this nice-looking case. Let's see. Okay, this one does not have the rotate option. So we'll just have to walk through. There it is from the front. It does have a tempered glass side panel with 4 thumb screws to hold it to the chassis. So you don't have to worry about it falling off randomly, unlike some of the other latching mechanisms. Here it is from the same side with the tempered glass side panel removed. You can see you have plenty of space in there for mounting up to ATX motherboards. It does come with a shrouded basement to put in your power supply and all your nasty, nasty cables. Here is an exploded view showing everything that's included in the case. Notice it does come with dust filters for pretty much every open spot in the case. And it does come with a single case fan in the back, 120 millimeter, of course. Here we can see where the hard drives are stored. And they come in those nice hot swappable bays in the front. Of course, you do have to take the front panel off to get to them, but that's how it's able to be as compact as it is. And so, that is the Fantex Eclipse P300, a solid budget option and a good case that is excellent for basically any starter build.
Yep. I found that one, Ned.
Yes, you did.
It's such a good-looking case, Ned.
It is a very nice looking case. One I've considered for builds of my own in the past, but, well, I've talked about before how I generally am not a fan of the solid front case, where the airflow is entirely dependent on either side vents or top and bottom vents.
Mm-hmm.
That's really my only gripe against the P300. Otherwise, it's a very solid case.
Completely understand, and I agree with you.
Because, well, my current system is in the Cooler Master Master Box 5. Very nice case. Excellent in every way except one. And that's this piece. You'll notice my piece is dusty because I took it off the front of my case so it could breathe better.
Yeah. Is it helping?
It does help significantly with temperatures. It's not that it's a bad design. It actually looks really cool when you put the front panel on. It's just that those side vents are just not quite big enough.
Yeah.
Which they fixed that in later iterations of the case, but, well, I've got what I've got, and I got to make do with it.
Right.
Which is part of the reason why, when this system gets rebuilt, I'm going to be moving it over to my Corsair Graphite 600T, which has a huge mesh front and has room for lots and lots of fans.
There you go.
And with that, we have exhausted the show notes for this week. Jason, you have anything else you'd like to talk about or include?
Not really. It's just when we were looking for deals earlier, I just happened upon a Red Devil card, and it took me back a little bit when I was building my cousin's system. We put an RX 580 in his, and I remember looking at the Red Devil cards and just thinking, my gosh, I just really love the backplate. It's just a really nice looking card. So I went to the website and I was looking at the 590, and I was just thinking in my head how interesting it would be to put like a Red Devil looking or themed computer together, like an MSI type motherboard, and just going all out. I don't know. I just the modder in me was thinking out loud in my head, and out loud and not out loud, but inside my head.
I understand. Oh, that does remind me. There is one deal we did not show. That was my fault because I forgot to include it. But it will be included in the links down below in the description. And that is the deal we talked about earlier. And that would be the Intel 660p.
Ah, yeah.
The Intel 660p. This is the 1 terabyte version of the NVMe drive. Notice, 1 terabyte NVMe drive for $109. Now, there's been a few times it has been on sale for less than this, but not by much.
Not by much. I mean, maybe $5 or $10.
I think the lowest it's ever been was like 102.
Yeah.
And honestly, at this price, for this type of NVMe performance, you really would be hard pressed to do better.
It's pretty solid.
Megabytes per second reads, 1800 megabytes per second writes, 150,000 IOPS in random reads, and 220,000 IOPS in random writes.
I mean, if you're looking for just a solid SSD as a boot drive and an apps drive, I mean, yeah. This is the type of drive you put in your system if it's a laptop or a desktop, and you forget it's there. And it'll last probably the lifetime of at least 2 computers, I would guess.
Yeah, they put a mean time between failure of 1.6 million hours.
So, to put it into perspective, my 3 or 4-year-old Samsung 250 gig SSD still has, where is the endurance specs? Drive remaining life 91%, and I've written 32,852 gigabytes to the drive.
So 32 terabytes on what is a 240 gigabyte drive?
Yes.
So yeah, you've written that drive roughly 8 times over.
32,000 gigabytes.
Okay, so roughly 16 times over.
Where's my calculator? So 32,852 divided by, so it's a 250 gig. I've written it 131 times over, basically.
Okay, I thought you just meant 3,200. You meant 32,000. Gotcha.
Yeah, 32 terabytes, dude. Yeah. So, and it's still showing 91% life left in the drive. So, yeah. If you get a good brand named SSD like that Intel 660p, it's going to be with you for quite a while.
Indeed. You know, some people have concerns about the write endurance of QLC NAND flash, since it is technically has higher density and thus lower drive writability. But I really don't think you're going to have to worry about it for the workloads you're going to be using this for. This is going to be your boot drive in your budget system. It's going to be like your games drive in your mid-range gaming system.
Mm-hmm.
For those use cases, you're going to be fine.
Yeah, that's exactly what this drive is pretty much designed for. It's not made to be some enterprise level scratch disk that is constantly getting read from or written to, or simultaneously. It's not designed for that kind of hard usage.
No, this is designed to be the entry level NVMe SSD to get everybody into the technology and into using that drive type.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yes, you can find 1 terabyte drives that cost significantly more than this that have much higher performance. But I can tell you, from having an NVMe drive myself and moving from a SATA SSD to an NVMe SSD is far less perceptible than moving from a hard drive to any type of SSD.
Yep.
And I think a lot of people, if you put this Intel 660p drive against a, something with like a Samsung 970 Pro side by side without running any benchmarks and just use them both, I don't think you would see a significant difference day to day.
No, it would be almost imperceptible.
And so with that, we really truly have exhausted everything we meant to discuss this evening. And so whenever you're watching this, if you've enjoyed this content, of course, you can check out our other TechForge videos here on our YouTube channel, as well as the other great content that we have here. You can find us on twitch.tv/CrossForgeGaming 5 nights a week, Monday through Friday. Live streaming whatever games happen to interest us at the time. Jason usually is on Mondays streaming World of Warships. I'm streaming on Tuesdays, streaming whatever happens to catch my fancy. And you can also find us on all your favorite social media. Twitter.com at CrossForge Games, because unfortunately CrossForge Gaming was already taken. And on Facebook, look for the CrossForge Gaming Community Group. And we also have a Discord server where you can join us to talk about your favorite games or just to chat with us in the Discord server. In the meantime, I've been Ned. This has been TechForge. And remember, when life has you down, Jesus loves you, and forge on.
Feel the power of the